Welcome to Road to Recovery.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. Sagi is founder of Shaked Law Personal Injury Lawyers and is ranked as one of the top 100 trial lawyers in the United States by the American Trial Lawyers Association. With a wealth of experience in personal injury, wrongful death, and complex litigation cases, he passionately advocates for victims and has recovered multi-million-dollar settlements for his clients. My name is Sean O'Connor, and today we're talking about herniated disc injuries after a truck crash. Sagi will go over how they happen, how they're often missed early on, and what they mean for a legal claim. Sagi, first of all, what is a herniated disc? And then, why are these injuries so common in, of course, what are high impact collisions, in commercial trucks?
So think of a herniated disc. It's one of these spinal discs that sits between your vertebrae, and it acts sort of like a shock absorber. Think about it that way. So it's the cushion between the bones. So if this was a vertebrae and this was a vertebrae, you'd have your disc in the middle, and it's your shock absorber. So now when that gets damaged, the inner material either it bulges out or herniates out. So that's what a herniated disc is. Now, when you have those trucks we talk about or cars and you have moving fast, it doesn't even have to be that fast because doctors will tell you can sneeze in herniated disc. So when you have a car hit you and you have the acceleration, deceleration, or the twisting and compression, you can get a herniated disc. And then think about this. You don't have to have a broken bone to have a herniated disc. So anyone who's watched any type of football, Peyton Manning back in the day as quarterback, he didn't break any of his bones in his neck, but he had a herniated disc and he had to have surgery to that. So you don't need to have a broken bone to have a herniated disc.
Makes sense. I think there's situations where people don't even realize they have a disc injury until days or maybe weeks after an accident. What's the reason for that? Like, why isn't it obvious right out of the gate?
So you wouldn't really know that you have a herniated disc until you get some sort of imaging. So it's not like someone's going to rear end someone and then oh, I got a herniated disc. No, you have what's the signs and symptoms that could be a herniated disc. So sometimes, and again, sometimes that adrenaline is going on where, let's say I have a crash right now where a client broke his front teeth in a crash and his neck was hurting him, but his main problem was he was bleeding from his mouth. Right. And that was the real problem. But you can start seeing it. It's the inflammation that builds over time. And at the beginning, it could be stiffness in your neck. Mm-hmm. And then you start, the tears start happening in that cushioning of the disc where you start having problems lifting or bending or driving. And so you start having irritation on the nerves. You start seeing that we talked about earlier, the radiculopathy, mm-hmm. the radiating pain, and you start getting those strains and strains.
Got it.
Sprains and strains.
Sprains, yeah. Makes sense. What makes disc injuries more complex than a typical neck or back strain? Especially when it comes to proving the nature and severity of the damage. What's the challenge there?
Right. So the challenge would be is you have a sprain or a strain, and usually that's like you have muscles and tendons involved, not the nerve, and they're painful, but they generally improve over time. Now, when you have a disc injury and it's touching or what they like to call compressing the nerve, that's the language you see in the MRI reports. If it's compressing the nerve or it's pushing on the nerve, it starts radiating, causing radiating pain, some weakness, numbness, sometimes some long-term implications. You'll start seeing, if it's really bad, some atrophy where the muscle will start wasting away. So insurers love to keep it at a sprain or a strain, because those are normal MRIs when an MRI comes back normal with no herniated disc, just regular MRI. So they'll love saying that it's just a sprain and a strain. And I can tell you every doctor who works for the defense or does these will always say every injury after a crash, 6 to 8 weeks of treatment, nothing else is reasonable. So if the person is still having treatment, A year later, the insurance company is going to say, we're only going to pay for 6 to 8 weeks. We don't believe this injury is from this crash. Well, what is it from, right? If it's 6 to 8 weeks is all you can get. But that's just what they do. This is, if you're going to be in this arena, expect a defense doctor to tell you 6 to 8 weeks. I even tell my clients, I mean, we go to trial a lot. We were just in trial a month ago. Today is February. Yeah, we were in trial a month ago. Uh, and the insurance company says the same thing, that the neck injury after 6 to 8 weeks, it's no longer from this crash. Well, what is it from then? Why is that individual still having issues months later, even a year later? So they don't have an answer for that, but they try, and sometimes they're successful in pulling a fast one on the jury. But I think the juries get it right most of the time.
Well, and what about from your own? I mean, you're just mentioning a case from last month. Is there a case where imaging or specialist evaluations revealed a herniated disc that wasn't obvious at first, and and it ends up changing the direction of the claim?
Yeah, so absolutely. There's a lot of those cases where initially the person is complaining of some pain, and so the general protocol is when they're complaining of pain, they'll have them do some therapy, sometimes take some muscle relaxers, and if that helps out, then great. You move on. Like the defense doctors will say, 6 to 8 weeks. But if after 6 to 8 weeks or even before you're still feeling this discomfort and feeling that nagging, whatever it is, the radiating pain or the stiffness, then they want to do MRIs, which is images of your neck or back or whatever part of the body they're imaging.
Mhm.
And then they want to find out what's going on in there. What's the root cause of this problem? Yes, the root initial cause is the crash, but what now is causing all these symptoms that you have from the crash, right? So that's when they'll do the MRI. Because remember, an x ray is not going to find anything for a disc. That's
Right.
for broken bones. X ray, broken bones. Then there's CT scan, which is a little bit better than an x ray, but it has its limitations. And then the gold standard would be your MRI. So
Mhm.
we'd want clients, if they're still hurt, hopefully the doctor will have them, if they're hurt, get an MRI. And that MRI will kind of guide the doctor what's next on the treatment path. So it's sort of like a guidepost.
Right. Okay. So, and you may have answered this question, but if the MRI is the gold standard, which is how you're going to determine that the disc is herniated, right?
Correct.
And so, how does the herniated disc affect, say, mobility, strength, or nerve function? And then why is that important when looking at long-term medical needs? Before that, or after that first few weeks.
So after you have the MRI, you want to find out, from your client, or the doctor is going to want to find out what are the signs and symptoms based on that. So they have the MRI, they're looking at the signs and symptoms. Are they having weakness, in their hand? Are they dropping things? Is their hand going numb? Because sometimes people have numb hands, or they feel the tingling in their hands, and that's the nerve being irritated. So now they try to do different types of remedies, from injections to surgery to radio frequency ablations where they're burning the discs. So it really depends on what part is bothering them, what are the signs and symptoms, so the doctors can make that treatment plan. So they get the guidepost from the MRI, then they take together the um, findings that person tells the doctor, or the findings that the doctor has, and then they can determine, is this a disc, is this the nerve, is this the ligament, what's going on with this disc, how is this disc impacting them, and then once they find that out, they know how to start that treatment.
You mentioned earlier the doctors for the defense or the insurance companies, and I'm curious, why do insurance companies push back so hard on these disc injury claims? What makes these injuries a frequent target for dispute? I mean, it sounds like they are. I'm curious why that is.
Well, we start off with the very basic. Insurance companies are in the business of making money, and they don't want to pay claims. They want to just take your premiums and not pay claims. So that's number one. And they spend large sums of money on tort reform, and we need tort reform, and it's very bad, and the lawyers and this. The lawyers are taking the money. Well, if you paid the money, you wouldn't need lawyers, but unfortunately they don't. So they spend a lot of energy on these MRIs. They have their radiologists in their back pocket because an MRI is so subjective. One doctor can look at an MRI and say it's a herniated disc. Another doctor can look at an MRI and say it's a bulging disc. And then it really depends. So the MRI alone is never just indicative of, does this person have pain? Because an MRI doesn't show pain. An MRI just shows the condition. Then what does that condition cause? That's what we're looking for. So, the MRI, the insurance companies will like to use the word degenerative, or what you'll use is what they call desiccation, which is the drying out of the discs. And as we get older, we all degenerate and our discs desiccate. So you're going to see that shock absorber, which was nice and round, and it's good shock absorber. Now it's drying out, and you start seeing people starting to hunch over a little bit as they get older, and they start shrinking. Right? People get smaller as they get older, but it's because your body's degenerating, and that's just the normal wear and tear of the human body. And so they try to say that this is normal wear and tear. It's not that that car hit you at 60 miles an hour and smashed your car and smashed metal and, hurt your neck. That's not what it's from. It's from you're just getting older. Deal with it,
Right.
So that's why the MRI is important and where they fight.
Got it. So let's say, someone's been in a truck crash. What are the most important early medical steps that person should take if they suspect a disc injury? What would you tell them to do? What's most important?
First thing I would tell them, even before you go to a lawyer, go to that. If you're hurt, go to the hospital or the ER. You want to get evaluated. You want to report everything that's bothering you, from your neck to your back. If you're having radiating pain, if you're having that numbness or tingling or weakness, headaches, whatever it is you're having, not all the time do we have just neck and back issues. Sometimes it's arms, legs, whatever the issues are. It's important. If you're hurting, then you report it. And some people are not keen about going to the ER, but I would at least go to a doctor right away, primary care physician, or a doctor or a specialist that's close to your house. And then if you're still having these nagging issues, sometimes you have to ask the doctor, can you get me an MRI? Because I really want to know what's going on inside my body. I've been doing this for 3-4 weeks and I still don't know. All I know is it's pain. Let's try to figure out where it's from. And then you don't want to have what's called gaps in treatment, where you go on for months on end where you're not going to the doctor. If you're hurt, go to the doctor. If you're not hurt, don't go. Don't even have a case if you're not hurt, right? And then you want to track. I like people to track their sleep, their work, their driving, their household tasks, their lifting. Track those things and see how they've changed for you over time. Are you compensating? I remember one time my arm was hurting me, or my wrist actually. And to do this very motion of just like turning the doorknob or turning the knob to turn the water on was so painful for that. I mean, it's 100% perfect now, but it was so painful that I had to start using my other hand and compensating. You just don't think about those things when we're doing that. So if you're having changes, make sure to document them, because you're not going to remember them, 6 months down the road or a year down the road.
Yeah, and you don't want that gap either, like you said. So
Exactly. And the gap is a defense attorney's dream, and insurance companies, they love the gaps.
love the gap. So let's say we've got someone dealing with chronic pain or nerve symptoms months later, months after the incident. What does that usually indicate about the seriousness of the underlying disc damage? Can you make any conclusions or infer anything from that?
You can say that there's a structural component that has been impacted, right? A structure, because you knew what your life was like before. Your life wasn't filled with that numbness or that tingling in your fingers or that nerve irritation that you were having. You had a status quo. And now suddenly you have this structural difference in your body that's causing you all types of issues. And those are the things that really need to be communicated to the doctor. Again, if they're not in those records, it's like you didn't have them. So I would communicate and have your clients communicate. If you're a client, and communicate. If you have clients, then you want to communicate it. Again, you're having radiating pain, whether it's the right or the left, going down the arms, note it. If it's going down your legs, note it. If you're having weakness, whether it's burning sensation, tingling sensation, weakness, those are things that have got to be put in the records, which means if you're not complaining about it, it's not done. So you can have chronic pain that you didn't have before. And, those nerve symptoms that you have, we talked about tingling, the weakness, the radiating pain, those can continue to happen. And those have to be in those medical records if you're looking to make a claim. If you don't care about making a claim and you're not hurt, again, this isn't for you, this talk, right? But if you're hurt and you're looking to, you want to make sure that's communicated to the doctor. So it's super important to continue treating and take care of your health.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm thinking about earlier you mentioned a client, the multiple injuries, but initially there's oh my God, I've knocked out a tooth and I'm bleeding out of the mouth. And then, maybe a day later, oh, wait, it's my neck. And I'm thinking about how as as adrenaline subsides and certain things, I mean, essentially it's a moving target. So that documentation and really paying attention and tracking seems super important to, just to, if you have a case, you want to have it as strong as possible, right?
It's extremely important. And again,
Yeah.
sometimes you have the masking of the injuries,
Right.
or your teeth pain or your jaw pain is so bad that you're not even thinking about your other injuries.
Right.
You're just dealing with this, and it's so occupying your life that the other injuries don't even come up until you've got this issue under wraps. Now you have all this other stuff that you realize to really have these problems, they're still causing me issues. Or sometimes you're just taking pain medication because of, let's say, your jaw or your teeth, and it's masking everything else that's going on.
Yeah.
So those are important things. It's important to write these things down so you don't have gaps in treatment.
Good points. Good advice. Another great half hour spent, give or take. We're out of time. Sagi, good to chat with you again.
Thanks, Sean.
That's it for today's episode of Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents. If you'd like to learn more about Sagi Shaked and his work at Shaked Law Personal Injury Lawyers, visit his website, shakedlaw.com. You'll find resources there to help you understand your rights after a serious accident and what it takes to protect your future. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe to the show, and share this episode with someone who might need it. I'm Sean O'Connor. Take care.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.